Hello, this is Mouse, and it is the required reading of Superman stories. The best Superman stories that I can recommend that people read. I'm going to put a link in the description box. About 2 weeks ago, I did what I thought was a fantastic live stream where I just talked about a lot of these stories at length and took our time. And this is going to be a shorter version, just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on here. So, most of the stories that I'm pulling from are from a little bit of the Bronze Age of the 70s, the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Basically, because from 1938 all the way up until about 85, you really could not mess with the figurehead of a company, the face of DC Comics, if you will, Superman, too much. And I think this kind of made for, along with a lot of things in the times, made for some overly simplistic stories or just not a lot of character development. But a lot of really good stuff came out. So just excluding those, don't read into that. A lot of great people worked on those. And my favorite era is the 60s Silver Age sci-fi stuff that had anything to do with Krypton. So there's a lot of information out there to where you can get caught up on Superman and his history of, that's been going on since 1938. So please check out that live stream. I'll show you a few sources that you can read. But the one that I'm kind of showing you, what's going on is that this is a Wizard special publication from 1998. That's just an overview of what Superman is and a lot of what he's about. Catching up readers, what DC had done with him. But they do have a section in here where they give you top 10 stories. And this is why I needed to do this, because yes, this is 1998, but I think they put in a few things here that they're not the best. They're great. Some are even good. But the Action Comics annual with Art Adams doing art, where Superman and Batman are in a swamp, and they run into some vampires, and the whole hook of the story is what happens when a vampire whose weakness is solar radiation runs into Superman, whose weakness is not only magic of supernatural sorts, but he is a solar battery walking. What happens? Post-apocalyptic stories. How the Superman and Aliens miniseries got in there, I have no idea. And then, of course, there's some Alan Moore and a lot of John Byrne stories. Alex Ross, Mark Waid. So, yes, that's what inspired this. And I'm glad this was on the next page, because there's one story that I didn't look up before this, but they made a cartoon adaptation of it, of sorts, with the Superman animated film of the 90s, where Superman is transported to, I believe, the future, and he's under a red sun, and he's trapped there for a while. But anyway, moving on. Lots of great stuff there. So moving on, we're going to start with, the way I'm going to present this is kind of like I'll put it in categories: where Superman came from, how Superman has inspired people, Superman adventures, and then stories that are directly of Superman, if you will, right? So one of the first places I think is a fantastic story is when John Byrne took over and decided to revamp Superman for the modern age, and actually just went back to his roots from the 30s. One of the things that he did was, when Superman found out he's from Krypton, he had to decipher what was put in his head by a hologram of Jor-El, who just put all of that information directly into his brain. And we get about 1,000 year history of the world of Krypton. And this is some fantastic stuff by Mike Mignola. It's very sci-fi driven. It's about clones rights, and what leads up to Kryptonian wars and political terrorists, and what causes Krypton to actually blow up. So they are a very cold race of people, and we get to see how lucky Superman was to actually come from Earth, and because basically on Krypton, they live in towers separately, away from everybody, a very sanitized life. They wear bodysuits from the time they are born that never come off. And when they make babies, they use a gestation chamber. The parents hardly ever actually meet in person. And he built a matrix. One of the things that I've always said on my channel is one of my favorite comic book characters. You know, we say Superman started everything. It was really Jor-El. Next time you're around a baby, someone who has a baby, think about what it would be like to think that in real life terms, to stick a baby in an experimental rocket, shoot him across the galaxy, and just hope some nice people find him on an alien planet. Now that's the thing. That's the stuff of sci-fi. We've heard this origin. This origin is actually part of our culture, but people need to slow down and think about how Jor-El started all of this. So this is just fantastic stuff. Now, being a completist, this is the story that kind of continues that, if you will. Basically, for Superman's 50th anniversary, Krypton had exploded 50 years in Superman's time, and it took 50 years for a wave of kryptonite radiation from that explosion to travel through the universe, and now it's hitting Earth. And Superman ends up being found by Hawkman. They get into their Thangarian spaceship, and Superman returns to Ground Zero, where Krypton blew up, and he has a fever dream of what would have happened if not only he came to Earth as a kid, but all of Krypton came. This is a fantastic story by Mike Mignola, and it's a little bit of a wink and a nod going back to those 50s and 60s of imaginary stories and hoax stories and things. And ever being the completist, Starman, Jack Knight, who is in space and ends up traveling back through time, actually lands on Krypton and meets a teenage Jor-El. And this ties heavily into Superman's origin, their meeting. And 2 years later, Starman and Superman get to talk about how he met Superman's father, Sons and Fathers number 75. So, I'll throw in Starman 51, 75, Superman Volume 2, number 18, and World of Krypton from the 80s. I'm saying that is all one story. Good stuff. So now that we know where he came from and what could have been and what he was, there are stories that are inspired just by the presence of Superman. I'm going to throw in Commandy number 29. This is the legend, but basically, like I said, make sure you look at the link and watch the live show. I'll go into this a bit more detail, but there's a contest in a post-apocalyptic world where people want to be the chosen one and get this costume. And there's a series of events based on the Superman myth, able to leap tall bounds and to fly and move rocks, and the whole thing. And basically, you never really find out is this Superman's actual costume, or is this the George Reeve television costume? Because basically, they were making Jack Kirby try to pull in his work into modern comics at the time, making part of the DC universe for whatever it was back then. But this is a classic. If there were one issue of Commandy I would tell people to read, it would be this one. And they, of course, in Superman number 295, they had to go ahead and let you know that is Superman's costume and come up with a story about how the costume ended up in a post-apocalyptic world. This story basically is that due to recent events in Action Comics 553, the issue before this, Superman ceased to be on this world. He had to go with Rip Hunter to the dawn of time, and things happen. So now we have a world where these silly-looking little aliens are invading the Earth, but there's no Superman. But these two little boys named Joe and Jerry are telling stories while everybody is mad at them. The kids are like, you need to come over here and help us work. These aliens got us slaving away. And their parents are like, grow up, your stories aren't going to do anything. But what happens when they actually end up creating Superman? I think this is a fantastic story. Marv Wolfman, Gail Kane, from 1984. Fantastic story. This is required reading. And then this, I'm kind of going ahead of myself here. But I decided to put this here because, to me, this should be the #1 Superman story ever, but it's not really Superman. Kurt Busiek has given us 4 issues in the life of a man, from teenager to college student, in his 20s to a married man, all the way up until his 60s. And I think years ago, I actually did a review of this of this book. And basically, this is Earth Prime. This is inspired by what was Earth Prime. Before Crisis on Infinite Earth, Earth Prime was our world, the real world, and all the superheroes are in comic books. And what he did is that a kid named Clark Kent, that every time he had a birthday, people would, they would laugh around and joke around and give him Superman stuff because the Superman, it's a comic book because it's the real world. And then all of a sudden he finds out that he can fly and he's invulnerable. And he uses the inspiration of the Superman comics on actually becoming Superman in the real world. And this is written as it is in the real world. So if you like Kurt Busiek's slice of life stuff, the government, and the future of what's going on, this is the best thing Kurt Busiek, in my mind, has ever written. It is the best Superman-inspired story. So that just kind of shows you what Superman is to people. Superman is not only seen as a Moses in comics and a Christ-like figure, but he's always been about hope. And that hope is reflected in this fantastic story from the 90s, Panic in the Sky. Okay, this was a crossover back in the 90s Diamond era of the Superman books, where you would actually have to look at the Diamond to be able to see how all the books tie in together, the reading order. And at this point in time, there is no Justice League. And we have Brainiac coming down, invading the Earth. And Superman is able to, there's an issue missing here, it's in another box. And Superman is able to just give a call to all the heroes, since there's no Justice League, bring them in and try to stop this invasion. It's fantastic stuff. Terry Gamble, Jerry Ordway, Tom Grummett, Roger Stern. It's all collected here if you want to really get in there and read this. And this could have been a crossover event. Since 1985, we had Secret Wars 2 and Crisis, and then the more like Massacre at X-Men. And every year they got to the point where we were having these great big huge crossover events through all the books. Well, they maintained this one in the Superman books. And this one is just beautifully drawn. And you got to remember, in the 90s, everybody was image crazy and indie crazy and stuff, right? So this was fantastic. This is just a great straight out Superman story. Great art, lots of heroes, lots of winks and nods, and just a lot of bang for your buck. And it's all about, what Superman can do and inspire, and what he means to the other heroes at the same time. And we are just moving right along. So now we're at the last part of it. And these are the books that, along with that Secret Identity I showed you, these are the required reading. Because if you want to know Superman, the character, this is everything that is Superman. This is Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale doing a Superman for All Seasons. This is from 1999. And this kind of ties in between the Superman Man of Steel by John Byrne. We started out with Superman in high school. 4 chapters in different eras of his life that are close together. And what we get is we get the difference between Smallville and Metropolis. And Superman sort of growing up and dealing with Lex Luthor and those relationships and having tough choices and being able to not doubt himself. This is a beautifully drawn book. Fantastic story. Just rips your heart out. And it gives me the feel a little bit when we're in Smallville of a Jimmy Stewart movie. The 40s and 50s, the way things are drawn. And now we have All-Star Superman. I just grabbed my number ones. This was a 12-issue miniseries where, out of continuity, Grant Morrison went back. And when Grant Morrison writes stories, he does his homework. He goes back and he reads tons of comics. When he was on Batman, he read all the Batman books, breezed through them and stuff, going back to the 50s and stuff. And this is the one where we return to what Superman is. 12 issues of Superman finding out that he is dying. And it's the sun, ironically, that's killing him. So we have a Superman that knows that he's on limited time, and we get to see the bumbling Clark Kent. We get to see him have talks with Lex Luthor. We get to see him try to give Lois Lane powers and the Bizarros. It's 12 issues of everything that is the epitome of Superman. And depending when you're watching this, this is what James Gunn has been teasing on Twitter for the last year and a half, of always having this book beside of him when he was writing the script with Twitter pictures. So we'll see what the mileage is on that. Oh, and I've got more here. I skipped ahead. So then right here, this is all the Alan Moore stuff. I found another stack by my legs here. This is the Alan Moore stuff, right? This is a hardback you can get. And this has everything that Alan Moore has ever done. If you don't want to go buy this list, you just need to get this book. And this is every story that Alan Moore has written is all about the epitome and everything that Superman is. When Crisis on Infinite Earths was hitting and John Byrne was about to revamp Superman for his 50th anniversary, Alan Moore wrote a two-part story of an imaginary story of whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, where everything makes you think that this could be all of Superman's enemies finally coming after him having to protect all his loved ones. We even get the Silver Age Legion of Superheroes in, and he has to save everybody and protect everybody. It gets very personal. And everybody actually from the future comes to say goodbye. Then in the middle of this, we get to DC Comics number 86, where Superman and the Swamp Thing team up. Alan Moore had this fantastic, breathtaking, and required reading run on Swamp Thing. We finally get to see him meet with Superman, but there is a meteorite that has a fungus/bacteria, plant-based, from Krypton on it, and it drives Superman insane. So he has to drive across the country to go where there's no people so he can die without killing people. And along the way, he runs into Swamp Thing. And then we have perhaps what some people consider the greatest Superman story for the man who has everything. This shows his relationship with his heroes and his greatest desire, as Mongol has put on the Black Mercy, that as it kills you, it grants your greatest wishes. And he has a life in his mind where he has grown up on Krypton and has wife and kids and his dad, and you see the sacrifices he has to make to escape the Black Mercy. And we finally get to see Superman pissed off. And now we'll go to the stack that I skipped over. Because once you know who Superman is and who this character is and what he is, there's been stories that have come out that you take great stories are based on a character being put in situations and seeing how he reacts to them. And Superman has always kept his base. Superman Escape from Bizarro was a 3-part story in Action Comics by Eric Powell, Richard Donner, and Jeff Johns. And we get a more horrific Bizarro who has kidnapped Superman's father, taken him to Bizarro World under a blue sun where Superman is going to be more powerful. And we get to see how tormented Bizarro is. And we see how Superman deals with crazy and horror, and he's trying to save his father. Fantastic story. Then we have Superman in Action Comics 775. What's Wrong with Truth, Justice, and the American Way by Joe Kelly, Tom Mank and stuff. But around the turn of the century, in the 2000s, we had the Authority book by Warren Ellis just blowing up everywhere. But that was the book because the heroes got proactive and they weren't very heroic and they did some nasty stuff. So DC came up with the Elite, who is a DC version of those Wildstorm characters, and we get to see the ultimate Boy Scout go up against the dirtiest players in the game because he's Superman. And we find out that Superman is capable of a few things, and we find out why our Boy Scout stays a Boy Scout, which there's nothing wrong with that. Then we get those horrific situations where Superman has to decide what to do. In the Supergirl saga that runs from Superman 21, Adventures of Superman 444, and Superman number 22, a 3-part story where we get reintroduced to a Supergirl, but it's not who you think. But there is a world, the Silver Age world of Superman, was stolen. The whole universe was stolen from a sliver of time of the DC universe, and that's where the the pre-Superman and Superboy stories supposedly took place in order to fool the Legion. I know it makes your eyes get crossed, right? But basically, General Zod and several Phantom Zone criminals of Krypton who have Silver Age Superman powers are destroying the world. Superman is pulled over to help save that world, which is the lost cause. They've been burnt. They picked 3 points on Earth and went to the center of the Earth, drilled holes with their bodies, and they've released the magma and stuff, right? So, it's a lost cause. And what does Superman have to do with them? How do you punish people who have killed billions? Superman has to make the choice of being the executioner on a world. He has to make a decision. And this decision affected the books for about a year after this, right? And then you have these fantastic Elseworld stories, Speeding Bullets. Superman, after he grew up on a farm in Smallville, well, what would have happened if he just left Krypton a little bit later and ended up in Gotham City, and he's raised by Thomas and Martha Wayne, and they're killed in front of him. We saw how Bruce Wayne deals with it. How would Superman deal with it? And does Superman find his way out of that darkness? Since he has powers that, with the way his powers work, he interpreted them as he is one with the bat. A bat can see in the dark. Well, he could also. So we have a whole different type of Batman Superman here, and it's just a fantastic journey. Okay, then Distant Fires. This is one of my favorite stories ever. It's also an Elseworld story. But what has happened here, this is by Howard Chaykin, killed Kevin Nolan. But what has happened here is we've had a nuclear war, a nuclear accident, if you will. Most of humanity is taken out, and the heroes lost their powers. And now those powers are slowly coming back, and we have a bit of a twilight of the gods, if you will. Humanity is being rebuilt. Superman is Clark Kent, Kal-El, is using his farming skills from where he grew up in Smallville to make Metropolis something fertile and where he can eat. He and Wonder Woman get back together. We start finding the other heroes. And then, of course, we end up having Shazam regains his powers. And now we have Marveltown versus Metropolis. And it has a very bad ending. But to go with that, this was 1998. This is from 1996, but to me, this is one of the ultimate Superman stories. Much like the Action Comics I showed you, and much like the Distant Fires I showed you, what we have here is commentary. In the future, Superman has been gone. He's been living in his fortress of solitude because the Joker did something very, very bad. And a whole other generation of heroes grew up without Superman as an influence. And we get what was there in the 90s. We have heroes that were more Cable-like, and Image-like, and Bloodstrike-like, and Deathblow-like. And now here comes Superman. And there's high stakes in this. And there's situations going on where it's he and Shazam. But Kingdom Come, if you have not read it, that is the one to read. So there you go, guys. Just to throw in two special ones for me. You'll see these in my, like I said, check out the link and watch the show. But this Superman number 9, this has a fantastic story where Kurt Swan he wakes up, he falls asleep at his drawing board while he's drawing his Superman story, and wakes up in Metropolis, and he flies with Superman. And then I've loved this one since a kid. This is Superman and OMAC, Len Wein and George Perez. DC Comics presents 61. And basically, this is a story that's very much like the movie Terminator a year before the Terminator came out. OMAC has come back in time to stop a robot that's out to kill his descendant. And Superman gets in the mix. So there you go, guys. That is some recommended reading for Superman. There you go. Check it out. Put in the comments if you read any of these or if you have any other books you want to tell me about. Later.